Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. So, Dr. Ding, as I understand the argument you're making, and it's a compelling one, the U.S. has an advantage because of the structure of our market economy and our R&D enterprise, that this technology can be diffused, adopted across sectors more rapidly, enabling us to realize productivity gains more rapidly and so on. I guess a question for you is it about maximizing the rate of diffusion in your terms, or is it about achieving the optimal rate of diffusion, and what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there is a difference. I can imagine a world where a country diffuses a technology very quickly in the initial years, maybe a technology that's unsafe or harmful, and sort of then there's a backlash to that technology, so it doesn't reach that optimal state or that optimal level of diffusion that you're talking about in the long run. So for me, when we're having discussions about AI regulations, oftentimes it's framed as regulation will hamper diffusion. And maybe in the short term, it might reduce the speed of diffusion, but I think smart, sensible regulation that ensures more trustworthy AI systems, safer AI systems, in the long run will get us to that more optimal rate of diffusion that you're talking about.
And in addition to, and by the way, I think the conversation is a little bit overweight risk to the point where we are in jeopardy of unduly restraining the diffusion of some productivity enhancing or research advancing capabilities. But in addition to the risks associated with economic displacement, which you spoke to earlier, Senator Rubio spoke to earlier, what are the other specific risks that you anticipate could emerge from too fast diffusion and adoption?
Some of the ones we've talked about today with regards to the use of these large language models, for example, for disinformation, misinformation, to kind of enable propaganda at scale. I think some of the risks that we haven't talked about today, we've seen examples of algorithms that have misspecified reward systems. So there's an example of an OpenAI system that is about like this boat trying to go through this course as fast as possible. And it's driven by an AI model based on reinforcement learning. And the model, because the programmers have misspecified how the model should learn, the model learns that the best way to accumulate the most points in the fastest amount of time is just to crash the boat immediately. And that kind of creates some sort of
So
bug.
short run, long run incentives, for example. Dr. Jensen, what are some specific potential applications of this technology in the conflict avoidance, risk mitigation? I mean, we've talked a lot about how it can make militaries faster, better informed, more lethal. What are the applications that are applicable in the institutional structures analogous to the red phone, the hotline, or the now moribund UN Security Council, or the kinds of verification regimes that were in place around the test ban treaty and so on? Open skies.
Yeah. Before we get to that harder intelligence problem set, I mean, I know that you have an interest in human rights in this as well. So think about what a peacekeeping mission would look like if I could actually tailor my messages when I'm doing key leader engagements and meeting with different stakeholders. I think that first, at that most basic level, it's not just, the best wars you win are the ones that you never fight without ceding the advantage. And usually that requires a degree of actually managing crises all over the world. So I think there's actually a whole way we could use those in peace building and development as well. When we go to the harder target sets you're talking about, which deal with hard target problems where an adversary is deliberately hiding something, so I'm using open skies, you can see me looking, but we're playing this kind of compliance game. I have to expend energy to hide. I think there'll be very clever ways of building models that simulate some of that or even help you analyze some of the data. But again, I would even be okay if we could have the simple models Dr. Ding is talking about. I would be okay if we could even just have some basic imagery recognition and accelerate it faster than we currently have, and then get to the other stuff. The most beautiful AI thing I've seen is watching a military officer, when we introduce this in the classroom, try to write their commander's intent. The most personal thing any military officer will do, because you are responsible for your actions, is to write your commander's intent. Well, why wouldn't I want to have a dialogue with the corpus of military history and look at different ways it was worded and different ways I could hone my own voice as I took responsibility for using force?
Mr. Chairman, one more question, if that's all right. So, Dr. LeCun, I'm not entirely sure what exactly you're proposing in your discussion of the merits of open source systems for the development and diffusion of a technology. Are you suggesting that it should be mandated that models are based upon and licensed on open source principles? Are you suggesting that it's simply preferable if developers use open source ethics and guidelines in the development and licensing of their models? What exactly do you mean when you advise us that this is desirable?
Senator, thank you for your question, which I'm personally very interested in. I think it should certainly not be mandated. It should not be regulated out of existence. There are people who are arguing that AI technology, particularly in the future, will be too dangerous to be accessible. And what I'm arguing for, personally and also Meta as a policy, is on the contrary, the way to make the technology safe is to actually make it open, at least the basic technology, not the products that are built on top of it, to ensure American leadership, because this is the only way we know to promote progress as fast as we can and stay ahead of our competitors. So that's the first point. Then there is a sort of future, sort of imagining a future in which AI systems reach the level of human intelligence, for example. Let's say a decade or two from now. The number may be wrong. Every one of our interactions with the digital world will be mediated by an AI system. All of us will have an AI assistant helping us in our daily lives all the time. You're familiar with the situation because you have staff working for you. So this would be like having a staff of artificial people, basically, who are smarter than you, possibly. I'm familiar with having people who are smarter than me working with me. Well, I defer to what I learned about this is from Eric Brynjolfsson, whose name was mentioned by Dr. Ding before. I think we have no idea what the major jobs that we'll hire in 20 years will be. There will be new jobs. We can't imagine them today. But to continue on this picture, everyone's information and interaction with the digital world will be mediated by one of those AI systems, which basically will constitute the repository of all human knowledge. That cannot be proprietary. It's too dangerous. It has to be open. It has to be open and contributed to by a very wide population, the way, for example, Wikipedia is produced through crowdsourcing. That's the only way to have enough of a diverse set of views to train those AI systems. They need to be able to speak all the world languages, know about all the world cultures, and this cannot be done by a single private entity. It will have to be open. It will occur as long as it's not regulated out of existence, because it's kind of the most natural way things will evolve, the same way they've evolved with the internet. The internet has become open source because it's the most efficient model.
Thank you.
I've got a couple more questions, but Senator King's got one. One of them I want you to stay for, John. I'd like to